Let me just pause here for a minute and go to the overhead here. If I represent the core asset base up here like this. So we have a number of different assets that I will simply represent like this. And coming out of the core asset base will be support for a number of product development efforts. I'll call them P1, P2, and P3. So what I want to do is create a set of products using the artifacts in my core asset base. So this product P1, let's say, very simple case, it just uses these two assets. Product P2 uses these two. And for whatever reason, product P3 right now uses only this asset. So every asset doesn't have to show up in every product. But overall, enough of the assets have to show up in the products to make it worthwhile. And if, for example, in the case of product P3, you only ever use that single asset in product P3 and nowhere else, you have to wonder, why is that considered a core asset in the product line in the first place? And who's keeping track of that, and who's supervising that to make sure that what gets produced in the core asset base is actually useful to product development. So in general, you're trying to reuse as much as you can across the set of products, but it doesn't mean that every artifact in the core asset base shows up in every product. It also doesn't mean that the core asset base provides the total capability for product development. In fact, in the real world, there will be artifacts that I'll represent as this long rectangle here that are needed in product development that aren't covered in the core asset base. And that's fine. That's reality. For customer-specific products, there may be things that are not directly addressed by core assets. What you're trying to do is minimize the amount of customer-specific stuff. But in practice, of course, the amount of customer-specific stuff will vary from one product to the next. And how good or bad you have been at predicting your customer needs for the envisioned scope of the product line will determine the amount of work to be done in a product development effort over and above the work that has already been done for that product in the core asset base.
So it would be a good business decision for that one product-specific component to whoever's designing it and writing the code to write it as if it was a core component for the eventuality that, hey, down the road this could evolve and become part of the core.
Yes, if that person is proactive enough and thinking about it and skilled enough. In practice, that may not be the case, which is why you need somebody at the level of a product line manager or somebody doing the business thinking to be able to
at least design it for reuse and then consider
and at least consider, not locking yourself into a product-specific solution. The other thing you should have in a product line organization is once you have products out in the field and there are product-specific components like the one shown here, if you start seeing a need for this kind of component in other products and you observe a trend, then that indicates that maybe this is not just a product-specific component. This is something that could be promoted to the core asset base. But that decision has to be made in a logical fashion and in response to a perceived business need. It's not the case that somebody in product development creates a product-specific component or set of component and then automatically promotes that into the core asset base. In fact, the last thing you want to do is pollute your core asset base with product-specific stuff. Raul?
Are these components developed into spaces where variability is considering the product line architecture for these things, or are these just things that come out at the product line level and maybe will never reach or will have any guidance from the product line assets?
Well, these artifacts up here, if they are software components, yeah, they will have been engineered for variability. So even though I'm showing the same kind of triangle here in practice, you have a triangle asset up here that can show up in the product as an equilateral triangle or an isosceles triangle and so on. So there are points of variation built in already to accommodate a range of products. But over and above the range of variability that's accommodated in those assets, there may be a need for this additional product-specific development here. And so that product-specific stuff is the kind of stuff that you don't want in your core asset base because it's only specific to that product. But as I said, if you start seeing a trend that you need that in other products, then that's a candidate for promotion to a core asset.
It's just that as if there's a possibility and the product line approach includes the ability for product line managers to decide that they want to add new components whenever there's a need. I was wondering if there is any additional guidance, because at some point that's going to affect the maintainability effort that you will have to spend developing all those products, right? And that's going to come out from what the basic training that the maintainers have based on the product line. They probably will not know those components.
Oh, yes. So introducing new components to what? To address things that weren't originally thought of in the core asset base?
Yeah, that's still supposed to be part of the scope that you originally planned for those products, right?
Right, and so the product line has started to evolve and you're seeing a need for the inclusion of some assets in the core asset base that weren't envisioned originally. So yeah, so somebody has to look at that and say, yes, these are in fact assets that need to be created to support a range of products, not just a specific product. And so now you have customers out there who are on an older version of a particular product that don't have these new assets. They may not need these new assets. So they're probably okay. But at some point you'll be migrating towards the new version of the core asset base, and then the practices that you have in place right now for product migration will apply in this case also, in that, how far back do you go to maintain backward compatibility?
It's almost like a refactoring version for product lines.
Yes.
Which is the whole temporal thing of, if you were trying to project this with the time dimension on it, showing how the cab is evolving over time and the products are evolving over time, and what the interactions between the products and the cab are.
Yes, and it would be nice to support that with some good configuration management tools.
And gets back to the meta model of your
yes.
core assets and things as well.
Yeah. Exactly. So this does require some discipline to make it all work effectively. And in particular, at product development down here, if you're structured into different organizations, you need to make sure that product development is actually reusing the core assets from the core asset base and not rolling their own, and not bypassing the core assets in favor of, hey, I know how to get this stuff, I can write this in a weekend, so I'll just do that right now and we'll make the schedule and we're done. And now you've got a maintenance nightmare because of clone and own.
Right, so is P2 V2 derived from P2 V1, or is it derived from cab V2?
Yes, exactly. So who makes that decision? And so and one of the other risks you run into, especially for organizations that are new to product lines and are starting off, they will make some local variants of products at product production level to meet the needs of specific customers because of time pressure or whatever. You'll end up with point solutions. The promise will be, we'll go back and we'll fix this up in the core asset base later, and you know how that goes. So, where's your product line manager then? So that's why I say this requires a level of process discipline. Whether or not you've been measured at a particular level on the CMMI scale or not, you still need to follow through on the roles and responsibilities and the organizational structure and the agreed upon rules for how product development interacts with core asset development and how a product architect interacts with the product line architect and so on.
Yeah, this is the challenge my current customers facing, with the exception of the Iridium satellites and possibly the new class of GPS satellites. All satellites are hand-built. They're all point solutions.
Yeah.
And trying to go to a product line approach with components that, based on the mission, you can bring stuff in and out, and the software to go with those. They're having to think things real. It's completely busting the current acquisition and development models for space. That's why there's a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, and in fact, on that note, with such a diversity like that, what would drive them towards a common solution? And for a lot of organizations, it's typically money. I don't know what the driver is in yours.
Money and response time. Most satellites are these exquisite school bus-sized solutions that take 5, 10, 15 years to field for one satellite.
Yeah.
And then so you're protecting this core satellite no matter what. And we've seen recently with what can happen, whether intentional or unintentional. The model they're going with is, okay, can we build, if they have to build one from scratch a year or less, and they've got one they're trying in a 2-year window right now, using existing components, and then they're taking it a step further, okay, these are the classes of missions, these are the common, they actually looked at some of the bigger satellite programs on a different tasking that was done, and they found they had an 8% commonality no matter what the mission was.
Really? 80%?
80% at size, weight, power, pointing accuracy, what components were on there, which launch vehicles were used, and so they started coming out with those classes of missions, and so now they're looking at 1 to 2 year lifespan satellites. So the satellite is a disposable commodity. The ground infrastructure is what you preserve and keep evolving.
Interesting. You definitely need a case
Yeah.
study from you guys.
Hopefully, I got lots of talk to Pat about.
Yeah, so anyway, if I go back to my